Alan, I remember. I mean, that was a terrific episode. But I think the surprising thing for me, first of all, was to suddenly discover that we're in a medical drama. Was that inevitable, or does it sort of connect with the themes of the previous two seasons?
Inevitable, given where we got to in the plot, I think. But there's always been a medical element, which is not to say that I mean, Sally Ann as a neonatal nurse, so there was always this notion right from the beginning in the fall that there were people dedicated to saving the lives of other people in context with someone who is dedicated to taking life. So right from the beginning, I had this notion that Sally Ann as a neonatal nurse and the fate of the tiny baby and the young mother would play against the idea that Spectre took someone's life. So at the end of the second episode, when Sarah Kay is returned, her corpse is returned to her father, and her father says, my baby, it intercuts with the young mother who is saying, my baby, to the baby in the incubator. And there are a couple of things at play there. I wanted people to recognise that we all have a very strong will to live, and that what Sarah Kay was facing at the end of the first episode was mind-blowingly horrific. The notion that when he removes the mask, that she sort of senses that he intends to kill her. So I was trying to get the enormity of that. And also try to, in some ways, play out the tragedy of losing a child or a sister in case of Marion, and that dramatising the idea that the very small baby who's only 21 or 22 weeks old has a will to live, strong will to live, and that the mother who's only 17, and this is what affects Sally Ann, already loves the baby from the bottom of her heart. So I was trying to say how much more painful and awful it is for Ian Kay to be looking at that site. So I was trying to convey the enormity of what Spectre does. And in the third season, again, as you will have seen, there are people dedicated to saving another human being's life. It just so happens that it's Spectre's life. But as O'Donnell says, that's our job, that's what we're here to do. But it can't be without complexity for them, and it can't be. And this is something in Northern Ireland that plays very strongly, because, of course, he says that in the scene, but, going back into the Troubles, you could be, as a medic, you could be treating, a member of the Shankill butchers alongside. You could be Catholic, treating a Protestant killer, or you could be, treating a police officer alongside a bomber or something like that. So they've always understood those dilemmas.
So when you started writing, did you intend it to go to a third season, and for that season to be in a hospital initially?
No, not quite. No, I mean, I originally pitched for 12 parts, and Ben Stevens said, well, you can have 5, and I said, I can't do it in 5, and he said, well, you don't have to finish it. So that was always, sorry.
I do remember the frustration at the end of the first season. We thought, we're not going to get him.
No, some frustration, I would guess, but also it was always planned that there would be a second season. Of course, I couldn't be absolutely sure there'd be a second season, but we were recommissioned after 3 weeks or something like that. With regard to the third season, yes, I always had ideas about where that would go, and I had a very strong idea about where it would end and how it would end for the characters. But it was, by its very nature, then a medical drama, so I had to kind of get my head around the idea of directing a medical drama for the first time, which was really interesting and a challenge, but exciting to do as well.
And it is called The Fall. Will we see redemption in this third part?
I believe so. I'm not going to say too much about what characters are redeemed and what aren't, but there's always been this sense that Gibson particularly is fighting to protect and to redeem characters where she can. That becomes even more of an imperative for her, I think, as the third season unfolds. But of course, all the characters are sort of fighting for themselves as well, in the face of the horror that someone like Spectre wreaks, on his family, on his wife, on the victims, the co-victims, and so on. So I've always wanted the ramifications of Spectre's actions to radiate out and, and resonate for everybody.
It does sound as if he's going to be a little bit more optimistic. The emphasis on people saving lives.
He says optimistically.
I say optimistically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And the idea that people are trying to save lives as well as destroy.
There are people who are trying to save lives, but I've always, I go back to what I was saying about Sally Ann, her dedication to save life. There have always been people who have been trying to save life, and that means biggest of all, Gibson, from the first moment is trying to stop him from doing what he's doing, find him, catch him, stop him from doing what he's doing, protect other people's lives. And so The Fall has always been about how far you can protect yourself against that kind of dark force when it's at large.
I suppose, Jamie, this kind of leads on to the question of whether there is anything redeemable in the man you play. You must have been relieved not to see too much dialogue in that first script. But it's an incredibly eloquent tear that you share. I mean, are we going to end up feeling sorry for this man?
That was a tricky time, trying to get that tear out. But it was a very technical shot. It was get the emotion. It was very tricky.
Was it real?
It was real, actually.
Yeah.
It was real. Yeah. Yes, thanks.
May I ask what were you thinking about?
God, we won't get into that. But it's hard to find any redeeming qualities in Spectre. But I feel that, when playing him, the aspects of him that are commendable, and I'm saying that there's very few, but I do think there's an element of he shows traces of being a good father at times, particularly. No, I'm serious. I'm serious. Specifically in the first series, I do think he shows something close to love, particularly to Olivia, to his daughter. I do think that he approached his profession as a bereavement counsellor with professionalism, and we've talked about this. I think he provided some good quality level of support to families who were in grief of losing someone. I mean, that's the genius of Allan's writing, is that this is someone who is very adept at taking life, and he is also relatively adept at helping people through losing someone. They are as close to redeeming.
And he has lost someone. He's lost his mother.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and that is a big element of the way he is, of who he became. Yeah.
There's this dialogue in the second season between Stella and Jim Byrne, where Byrne describes him as Spectre as a monster, and Stella says no, he's a man. He's on a continuum with other men. Do you agree with that? It sounds like you don't see him entirely as a monster.
I think it'd be wrong to play him entirely as a monster. I think he's got to have one of the reasons that makes Spectre, I think, compelling, and certainly I've found him very alluring from the first moment I read the scripts in the first series 5 years ago, whatever it was, is that he is, there has to be relatable aspects to him. There's got to be aspects that other human beings can identify with to an extent, and you've got. I always felt that when I'm playing those moments with the children, I'm playing them as a father and nothing else, and there should be no undercurrent of menace or a psychopath in those moments, because they are. Why would there be? He's a father talking to his daughter. He's a father talking to his son, and he's a husband talking to his wife in the early parts of the first series. I always thought to play him, I don't view him totally as monstrous, because I've always wanted to avoid that tag in my interpretation of portraying him.
So how method are you in preparation for this role? Do you lock yourself in a bathroom and think unclean thoughts for an hour before you go on the set?
No. God, I can always say, the worst thing always comes to my mind when people present questions like that. No, I have never done that. But I no. Look, I mean, that whole term method is so so many forms of it now. It's become this thing that this is one way to approach. But everyone, to an extent, every actor, I think, has a method of sorts, and they approach it a different way. You don't want to be too method in the layman's definition of method. I think most people think it's staying character all the time. I didn't I would never want to do for someone like Spectre. I don't think I would have a wife anymore. But you know, I've especially 3 series in, 4.5 years in, I have ways of locking myself into his psyche quickly without having too much of build-up for the most part, and that's just come over time and having an understanding of the character, I think. But no, I'm very much when I can, I jump out of his skin because I think that's appropriate.
There was a moment when we were in season 2. We were shooting in Spectre's lair, which is a really unpleasant environment, and it was with Val, who's here tonight, and she was playing Rose Stagg, and she was doing the stuff direct to camera, the defiant, well, the whole range of running the gamut of emotions that she was running through, including, and she was crying and shouting at the camera, and I was sitting by the monitor crying, watching her. Jamie was waiting to do his bit. I looked across at him. He had his head in his hands. He was so affected by what she was doing. And it came to the point where Val said, "Can I go again?" I said, "I can't actually watch you do it again. I promise you it's brilliant, but you can't do this to me again. I've written the damn stuff as well." And then Jamie did the bit where he turned the camera on himself, and he did it brilliantly, but it wasn't that he was identifying with Spectre in order to do that. Quite the reverse. He was in turmoil about it and felt the horror of it as much as anyone did. But when it came to acting that moment, he completely nailed it because he's a brilliant actor. And when we played the scene to Gillian, the editor cut those tapes together, and I said I didn't want Gillian to look at the tapes before she saw them, and so the scene where she watches the tapes and cries, we just put 2 cameras on her. It's 1 take. That was Gillian's response to watching the videos. So, you know, I'm blessed to have just brilliantly, emotionally deep and empathetic, powerful actors to play in the moment. But actors get into the moment, and in the moment, they believe it completely and utterly, and that's what they do. That's what they're so fantastic at. And actually, as a writer, if you're writing and you're not crying at a moving scene, then you're probably not getting it right in some kind of way. So I sit at the monitor and cry a lot of the time. But I figure that I should be in tears at some of the stuff I've written. But so
Gillian,
Val is...
Have you cried, Gillian, during the process of this?
Of this series?
This series?
Oh, God. Yes, but I'm not going to talk about it.
Yeah. No, nor should you.
No. Yes.
I mean, that really
we learn
is,
more and more about the characters as this season goes on.
Do you fit into that character quite easily, Stella Gibson, quite quickly now? It's the 3rd season. Do you find it easy to put on that outfit and become her?
Yeah, I mean, even when we're doing wardrobe fittings in Selfridges, you know, the minute those clothes get pulled off the rack and I put them on, I can come in my, you know, combat boots and my hair in a ponytail, and I put those clothes on and they're Stella.
Gillian, I think a lot of us would like to know at that moment when Tom Anderson asked, "Why did you go to the wounded Spectre before me in the woods?" And your character comes out with a very coherent reply. But are we to take that as at face value, or is there some kind of unhealthy fascination between Stella and the Spectre?
I don't think there's an unhealthy fascination. I think she's fascinated. She's obsessed with him and bringing him to justice. And the idea that he would get away with it, or that he'd get off easily by simply dying, I think is a quite difficult thing for her to grasp, that might be a possibility that's playing out in front of her. And so, you know, she can see that Anderson is shot in the arm and is likely to survive. I think she has been around long enough to suss that out, but she ultimately wants to save his life so that he can stand trial.
I mean, it could be seen as slight lack of compassion towards the man she just slept with.
A lack of compassion
She's
towards
quite
a man
she's
she
quite
just...
tender with him, I think.
She's very tender with Anderson. I think she's deliberately tender with him and treats him gently. And we see more of that as the 3rd season goes on. But she absolutely makes the right decision. I mean, she has to save his life. She can't, I mean, the family has to have closure. For him to die there on the side of the road would be I mean, beyond devastating for everybody.
It's always a learning curve as well, isn't it? For someone like Gibson, she's always trying to learn more about what makes someone like Spectre tick. On the basis of it will make her a better detective, a better police officer in the future.
Well, she's clearly the best police officer
in the world.
In the world, possibly. Certainly in Northern Ireland.
She makes a few mistakes.
Are any of you going to own up to that? She has any flaws? Do you think?
She has lots of flaws.
Give me one.
Give you one. I don't think it's.
That's not intended. That wasn't intended.
No.
That's not even a thing, is it?
No, it's not a thing. I don't think it's necessarily a good decision for her to have slept with Anderson. I think she's made some strange, morally ambiguous decisions as a police officer, and there may be repercussions. I don't, she's lied. I find that fascinating.
Mm-hmm. She's certainly a flawed character because all the characters are I hope, sort of true to life in the sense that they're a mixture of the good and the less good. But she's, her determination, her focus, her sense of her mission are all fantastic, I think. But it's a debacle at the end of Series 2 in the Forest, to be fair. And there will be, as Gillian suggests, it will be debated, it will be unpacked in some kind of way in the third season.
I think if she had ended up sleeping with Archie Punjabi's character, I think that probably would have been a mistake.
But she was from Croydon, so that wasn't going to happen. I'm from Croydon, you need to understand it.
Gillian and I wrote Sparring Partners. We discussed two years ago this part in some detail. And you did say when you first read Allan's script, you thought, yes, this is a woman I'd like to see out there in the popular culture now. She's the kind of woman the culture right now needs. Do you think she has got out there as that kind of role model figure?
I do, yeah, I do, thanks to Allan. I think that, well, first of all, certainly in terms of police force, I think there's been a few stories as of late where women in high positions in police have been undermined by fellow police officers, and in that respect. But also she's so comfortable with who she is as a woman, and answers to no one, is uncompromising, and I think she is. I don't know if I've ever met anybody quite like her. I wish I was her.
Do you?
There are lots of aspects of her that are not me, that would be fun and interesting to spend more time with, or to adopt in some way, I guess.
Of course, we don't know about her home life, do we? Because she's been transported to this other city. So.
Yeah. What do you think it is?
What do you think it is? Do you have a backstory for her?
Yeah, but I actually think it's more interesting not to know.
Yeah.
A lot more interesting, and we learn a little bit more about her in Series 3.
We do, yeah. I mean, I made a conscious decision in the first place, because it felt to me that a lot of TV detectives particularly, but TV characters created for TV, have a whole series of character traits and tics and things that they're presented up front, so they're often drunks, or they have they've had a case that's gone wrong, or they have a difficult marriage, or a difficult daughter,
dirty raincoat,
and a dirty raincoat, and I thought that's not really our experience of getting to know most people. You get to know people in a public context very often. You meet people at work, and you get to know people through the decisions they make, which is one of the reasons why I had her proposition, the police officer, in episode 1 of season 1, because it's a decision that comes and it makes you think, oh my God, who is this person? I thought she was perhaps one type of person, and now this is happening. But I wanted that to unfold gradually. And one of the things that happened was, whenever there was any suggestion, there was one there was one occasion, for example, where I wrote a phone call with her mother. But we were both very jumpy about that in terms of actually placing her in a class or what kind of person was her mother and so on. And Gillian's always been very wedded to the idea that that enigmatic quality of Gibson, where you learn about it little by little, was something that she really signed up to right at the beginning and plays brilliantly, which is that you, as Gillian says, you get more and more insights perhaps, but she doesn't come... It appears that she's not married, it appears that she doesn't have children, but I've always had this notion that if someone walked through the door and called her mother, you would go, oh my God, but you wouldn't, you know, it could happen. Yeah. I don't say it's going to happen, but it's that thing of...
It'd be sort of Act One, Scene One, Enter Godot.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So it's
moment.
Kind of, you know, we are judged often by the you know, the way we present ourselves, the things we say, things other people say about us, the decisions we make, as much as anything else. And so she makes a whole series of decisions, including, for example, when in Series 1, Breedlove shoots himself and Eastwood is at a loss, she takes over and she handles that situation in this incredibly cool, calm fashion, which was my way of saying, look at her in a crisis. This is quite an exceptional person here. And of course showing no kind of female, in inverted commas, responses to this.
So may I quickly ask I think it's appalling to ask it quickly, but there is the misogyny question that the TV critic from the Mail who called The Fall an invitation to share an extended rape fantasy. Do you think by writing these 6 episodes and you three playing them, that criticism will be silenced now?
I would probably doubt it. If someone has such a, you know, a kind of reductive, simplistic, unnuanced view of something, it's not going to change with another 6 hours of drama, I don't think. I mean, it's personally insulting. Mm-hmm. It's something I had to talk to my daughter about, who was, I'm glad to say, counselled me very well about why I should not give it any more thought, because I was very upset by the implications, because after all, whose fantasy would it be but mine? And it was confusing. I think something quite complex about the character of Katie, actually, is probably where it comes from. And but I got, you know, I can think of, for example, someone else who's a TV producer I work with, who's, you know, who wrote to me specifically to talk about the emotional truth that she found in the journey of the character of Katie. So you offset, I try not to read things like that, but you offset some of that with what I know that look, I can't, you know, you can't say that you've never made any errors or you haven't, you know, could have done something better or something different, but I know, because I know myself and I know these guys and I know what we're all about in making the show, is that that's just an absurd comment. And I'm not saying the show isn't open to criticism, because of course it is, but there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that it's adopted a particular view, a particular criticism of the patriarchy and the way in which male violence against women sits within the patriarchy. And Gibson's talked about that, discoursed about it endlessly from a feminist perspective, to the point where it seems to not matter what she says, set against what Spectre does. And surely the issue is that Spectre is a misogynistic character, although, as he says himself in season 2, I don't hate women, I hate everybody, myself included. And that's perhaps closer to the truth of Spectre, because actually the most violent thing we've ever seen him do is to kill Joe Brawley, you know. So it's that sort of drama, I think. I think it maybe is, you know, quite challenging in its way.
Yeah, I guess a certain sense of responsibility. I think it does affect the types of roles that I choose, but I think that regardless of that, I'd probably choose the same roles that I choose based on my attraction to that, to the types of female characters I like to play.
I'd met Jamie and I knew he was from that part of the world, so I thought it'd be a really good idea to get him in, and so we brought him in, as you rightly say, for the part of Olsen, which I didn't think he was right for when I was watching him do it, but we put him on tape for that, but when I looked at him on tape, I thought he had something extraordinary on camera, and I was pretty convinced straight away that we'd found our Spectre. I said so to all my colleagues, the Gub and Neil and everyone I was working with at the time. And so the suggestion was, I know Stephen Wright said, well, look, you're going to need more than him auditioning for the wrong part to present to Ben Stevenson at the point where we suggest that this is our piece of casting. So we dragged Jamie back from LA, and jet-lagged made him read for Spectre. I didn't need to do that, but it was felt that it should be done. And there was still debate going on because he hadn't done a massive amount, and there were other names being floating around, but I was absolutely convinced that we'd found our Spectre. And I got very vociferous about it, essentially saying if it's not Jamie, then we don't have anyone, we don't have a show. But I sent the audition tape to... I sent the tape to Gillian, said, I think we found our Spectre, and she emailed me back saying, hooray, we absolutely have. So that was a very useful part of my argument to get Jamie into it.
This, I think.
I think I am flattered by it.
It's just, I knew that whoever I cast was going to have to spend 50% of the screen time alongside Gillian Anderson. So I knew it had to be someone who the camera really liked, and who had an emotional depth, an intelligence in their eyes, an emotional quality, and so I thought Jamie had all of that. But it was, we went into it, as you do into the beginning of a new drama, pretty unsure what we were putting together, and it's a voyage of discovery. Not now, because he knows who Spectre is and he plays Spectre, he is Spectre, so again, it's just like a natural fit. But it was just seeing him on camera. I've had this experience before. There have been people, I watched an audition tape of Michael Fassbender when he was up for something I was doing, and as soon as I saw him on camera, I said, this guy's got something really special. Who is this guy? Then I really liked it, and we cast him. But, if you've got an experienced eye and you know what you're looking at in terms of acting, then, like with Gillian seeing the tape of Jamie, you can look at people and go, yeah, they're really, really good. Sometimes you make mistakes, but drama often stands and falls on the nature of your casting, and the new casting for Series 3 is really exciting. And we brought in some fantastic people, one of them sitting here today, who is a stunning actress, not known primarily as an actress either, so I'm very excited about that. But yeah, you just have to have an eye for what works on screen, and it comes from experience, I think, probably. Mm-hmm. And on stage, too.
I guess just perseverance, really, and to not take rejection personally. Sometimes rejection can be a gift, and as long as you show up and you feel like that you've done the best that you've done at an audition or whatever it is, and couldn't have given any more, then you'll walk away feeling like, I've left auditions feeling that I sucked, and I've left auditions for things that I really wanted and felt like I did okay, but I didn't actually necessarily need to have it because I knew that I did okay in the room and it wasn't up to me.
We were just discussing that, how insane the last 4.5 years have been, and actually the fall kind of marks, it's just been this omnipresent part of the last 4.5 years where personally so much has changed and professionally so much has changed for me. Yes, I wasn't a father, hadn't killed anyone, wasn't a husband at the time, although we were engaged just before I got the part. It's funny that we see. I guess we see less of him as a father in this series, I'd say, and having children. It's like a reset button. I mean, you're a totally different human being. The fundamentals of your life are instantly altered overnight. All in the most positive way imaginable. I didn't have any of that to draw on with the father aspect of the first series, but there is nothing like love you feel for your children. But I really drew on my niece. I didn't even have a nephew at the time, but the love I had for her, because it was the closest thing, and it's the only child that I'd sort of spent a decent amount of time with. And then it's easy enough to portray a husband. I think I'd been in a long relationship at that stage anyway, and it's just more of the same, isn't it?
When will you tell your
It's
children that you
better.
play Spectre? When are you going to break it to them?
I'm
While they're all being born,
not sure
you're
there's going to be
playing
some sort of ceremonious
the facts of life
moments.
discussion.
Yeah,
Luckily, it's going to be a long time in the future before he's going to sit them down and run the fall for them, I think, probably.
No, I know. Yeah, I'll do some stuff that's more family
Exactly.
friendly, probably.
Disney, I think.
A couple of Disney films
Yeah,
lined
well,
up for the
well.
kids to watch. I think this is something that actors do talk about, isn't it? A lot of their work is not really for the consumption of their children.
Yeah.
I think I always had the notion that it would develop in that way. I mean, you do try to surprise people, but you want to surprise people in a way that when they are surprised, they then go, oh, hang on a second, I can see how that could work, how that sort of internal logic could work. There's a theme at play about people who are not parented completely at play in the piece, and she's lost her father. Spectre cruelly reminds her of that in the scene in Made in Belfast where they're talking, and he says, well, he's essentially, no, perhaps it's on the Skype call, isn't it? I can't remember, in the restaurant, where he essentially says that the world is a terrible place, full of death and destruction, and has she forgotten that her own father was decapitated in a car, in a motorcycle accident? And she says, no, I haven't forgotten, in a way that makes it clear that it's an awful thing that he said to her. But I've always been fascinated by what Spectre thinks he's doing with her, because she's not actually potentially a victim, really, because he views her as a child, as that scene on the stairs in Series 1, where he sort of makes it clear that she's not on his radar as a man at that point, but of course she's not on his radar as a potential victim either. And that's just to do with Spectre's, skewed and strange view of what constitutes innocence. But Gibson picks him up on that and says, in what way was Sarah Kay not innocent in the way that, say, Olivia is? She questions him about all of those weird assumptions, like his apology to Ian Kay when he discovers that Sarah Kay is pregnant. It's up, basically. But I always wanted Katie to go on a complex, challenging journey, because she represents, someone who is fundamentally naive, and she has to learn, I suppose, across the course of the thing, that there are dangers in the world, and that actually Spectre represents one of them. And opening up to him is a foolish thing to do. But she's on a learning curve. There has to be an invention of detail and story. I mean, I discovered very early on in my career, when I was invited by Gub Neal to write The Second Prime Suspect. And before that, I'd only done sort of almost like small plays for television. I'd done a 75-minute one and maybe a 90-minute one. But suddenly I had 4 hours, and it was a realization that it uses up a lot of story. And that was something of a discovery to me, so that even if you know what your big sort of story beats might be, where you're trying to get to in story terms, there is going to be detail along the way that you have to invent, and tailor it for that slot, let's say. So whilst I may have had an idea about what was going to happen and where we were going to end up, there had to be a degree of invention along the way. But as you invent new characters, they start to dictate maybe some potential stories and side stories and things. So it's a process of trying to develop a sufficiently complex story out of the material you've got. So I knew I was taking Rose on, or whatever it was. I knew I was taking Katie on, and so on. But there were other, like the part that Aisling Bea plays, that was new and was a discovery across this season for me. That wasn't planned. I hadn't mapped that out in advance.